There we are, that's the beginning. So I feel honored to be able to present my paper to such a high-level audience. I got a lot of inspiration, in particular from Cassam's work, and I'm thankful that he came to us. Thanks, Mitya, for all this. And Cassam's papers offer a precious contribution to the understanding of the issues. His recent paper, Polarization Toolkit, tells us about the means politicians use to radicalize their audience. I want to follow his line of interest and concentrate on the preliminaries. How does it all start before professional politicians come in? But let us start by making clear the main concept. So here I'll talk about radicalization in the bad sense. So it's the opposite of Boufakis' view. Here I will just look at radicalization that leads to fanaticism, that leads to extremism. So when I say radicalization, I mean this bad way. So what is polarization? Broncano-Berrocal J.A.Carter in their book concentrate on group polarization and define it in terms of growing inclination of deliberative groups to incline towards more extreme positions than initially held. And we have this link to epistemology. This all happens within our cognition. I'll skip some of the stuff. So Berkoli and Moskalenko, for example, when they talk about political radicalization, they talk about two pyramids model. You've got the opinion pyramid. At the base of the pyramid are individuals who do not care, who are neutral, and then those who are sympathizers but not really radical, and then at the apex are those who feel personal moral obligation to take up violence in defense of the cause. And the other pyramid is the action pyramid. At the base of this pyramid are individuals doing nothing. And then again, at the top are those who are really doing violence and who are politically radical in this bad way. Since everybody is not moving, what happened? Since everybody is giving American and British examples, let me, and Hitler, of course, let me mention our example now that we are in Slovenia, it's former Yugoslavia. Our wars in the 19th are a closer example. You have on the left side is the Serbian symbol, on the other side is the Croatian symbol, and Croatian-Serbian polarization led to the wars 30 years ago. Two close people, two Slavic people speaking almost the same language. They were cooperating for centuries against their non-Slavic surroundings, the Hungarians, the Italians, the Austrians, etc. 30 years ago, they turned against each other seriously. And there, of course, historically, there was a potential for conflict, but the 80s witnessed this kind of bad radicalization very strongly. And around here, when we talk about radicalization and fanaticism and extremism, this is the closest example that we've got at home. Of course, the potential conflict was there, potential for conflict was there, but it exploded then. So here are some of the theses that I would defend if I had enough time. For bad radicalization through polarization is the standard form of radicalization process. There are alternatives. You can have one-sided radicalization, like the Germans radicalizing in the face of European relatively peaceful behavior, Chamberlain type. But these alternatives are rare. The usual process is really radicalization through polarization. The epistemic variant, since we are epistemologists, the epistemic variant of the process starts from disagreement and then continues towards polarization. So you have disagreement, you have then polarization, polarization goes to radicalization, extremism. And I will talk about two kinds of factors, turning disagreement into polarization. When does disagreement, when does it become worse and worse? I will stress the vicious circle that this radicalization through polarization happens both on individual and collective level. There might be a criticism of J.A.Carter, who is trying to separate the individual and collective levels. The vicious circle here, it really happens on both levels. The two kinds of problems in politics that are very prominent in recent times. One are issues within national communities, other are issues with foreigners at borders, say migrants, and then there is the third kind, is like the global issues. I have a thesis that I would like to discuss at the next occasion. I hope, Mitya, that you will organize another symposium with the same people that will see each other or later. And this is that polarization and radicalization often contribute to the form of self-consciousness that is implied there. The radical version of it, we know it all, is Hegel's version, who thinks that polarization is constitutive of self-consciousness. Today, I won't have time to go into this Hegelian version of it. And then, of course, there are consequences for the search of remedies. If there are two kinds of factors that contribute, external and internal, then we should search for external remedies and internal remedies. The same with various kinds of scopes within national communities, development of understanding, with foreigners at borders, starting understanding is all similar. And then there are global issues where we need a really cosmopolitan direction. Sorry, I'm repeating myself. The radicalization through polarization is the standard form of the process. Say one side, I skipped the counter examples, but here, so there are interactions with complete foreigners, with completely distant folks, or interactions within community. There is intermediary case, which is now very prominent. Foreigners at our frontiers, we are faced with a case that is such intermediary, the case of migrants, the physical interaction between us and them, but at our door. And the question is, what can be done in practice to counter such negative developments? What can mutual knowledge of the two parties contribute to the amelioration of the situation? One should concentrate here on the issue of vicious circle, which I find to be the most pressing explanatory issue in the area of radicalization. Etienne Balibar, for example, talks about endless spiral of the acts of violence. Nowadays, we can take as our central kind of example violent extremism in this context with migrants. Let me propose that the initial step of the circle are dictated by socioeconomic fears of the unprivileged classes of the host societies and negative attitudes caused by the experience of Western interventions in the societies of would-be immigrants. Both bring with themselves negative, mostly false and erroneous stereotypes that dictate the epistemic action on both sides. Once the two groups are facing each other, the vicious circle expands, deepens, and gains strength, and the negative stances are articulated by leading conflict mongers on both sides. So let me then paint my short, small picture. We should distinguish two kinds of pressures, internal and external pressures. Say you have a home person, call him Janez, Slovenian, and a foreigner, a migrant, call her Azra. What would be the external pressures? Well, the surroundings of both Azra and Janez with objective adversarial forces and polarization entrepreneurs that we've got quite a lot here at home. What are the internal pressures? Well, it's the psychological makeup of Azra's and Janez's minds. So psychological makeup, somebody might be simply dogmatic, having beliefs condemning others. If you disagree, you're heretic. Or you have the general shape of non-rational reasoning. A very good source is Judith Gluck, Wisdom versus Populism and Polarization. She's trying to apply the theory of heuristics and biases to the structure of non-rational reasoning in this sort of situations. In the intellectual case, in the case of debate, it will be a similar thing. External is the surroundings of the two debaters of A and B, for example, factors enhancing the competition between them. Or it could be a psychological factor like arrogance that Carter, for example, is interested in. On the wide scope, you have nations, you have religious communities with, again, external forces surrounding competitors, objective adversarial interests, objective adversarial forces, nationalistic or religious polarization entrepreneurs. You have a history of conflicts. In Yugoslavia, we had objective adversarial interests, the socio-psychological makeup, the stereotypes of national or religious identity, and the boring stuff, historical memory of past injustices and conflicts. Interestingly, so here you see, you have this list of various internal and external factors. And what I can't believe is that really literature, it mentions various cases, but there is no attempt at systematization at all. So take the anthology Alessandra Tanesini and Michael Lynch from this year, called Polarization, Arrogance, and Dogmatism, Philosophical Perspectives. They don't even mention the possibility of systematizing possible sources. This is what I'm trying to do here with external and internal. I think that division to internal and external factor and the attention to scope differences, small groups, bigger groups, nations, global, might lead to a systematic classification and then explanation of the relevant processes. Here, it will be clear that the ontology of the whole thing is happening both on collective and individual level. Berrocal and Carter argue that the process is either individualistic or holistic. Social hope for the later and exclude the compromise is completely wrong. Take the example of polarization entrepreneurs. Is their example, the success might not be due to their own epistemic limitations, so the resulting defect, and so vice is not just aggregation of individual vices. The elements on the individual and collective levels interact, and this explains the bad result. So once we take into account the kinds of pressures, prominently internal versus external, we see that the role of the collective changes within two kinds of pressures. Similarly, but to the lesser extent, with a difference in scope, the scope within society, nationwide and global. The diversity of relevant factors suppose the diversity of levels, from individual to narrow collective to wide collective. The same thing then with solutions. We know that solutions are slow and painful. Within relatively homogeneous communities, typically national ones, the road from conflictual liberty and equality to fraternity, to stopping the radical conflict is thorny and difficult, but hopefully not impossible. The example of endless history are the racial conflicts in the United States, to some extent in Europe, France, and UK, class differences and conflicts all around the world, etc. And so the theoretical epistemological question remains how to keep the good consequences of disagreement alive and block the bad reflection. A lot of reflection is needed here, but this is a task for another occasion. So thanks a lot.
Thank you, Nenad. Thank you very much for your presentation. Interesting indeed. And I would like to ask whether there is any question, comment, observation. So this was our, okay, Rita, please.
Okay, I just had a quick question about you saying there is nobody who tries to bring together internal and external factors. I just wonder what literature you're referring to, because obviously in the ethnic conflict literature, there are people like Stefan Wolf and Carl Cordell who've essentially written, you know, there is no such thing as a grand theory of ethnic conflict. It's, you know, different variables matter for different conflicts. So in a way, they say, if you could have a grand theory, they would advance it, but in a way you can't. But, you know, it's context dependent. So it seemed to me that there are people who are accounting for all aspects, if not in one theory.
Yes, I agree that when you look at particular areas, say the nationalist conflicts, there you have attempts, there you have, it's not very systematic, but there you have attempts. But in the topic as it's given here, as a kind of understanding of, let's say, epistemic vices, the general polarization and radicalization, you've got books like this Tanzini and Lynch volume and Berrocal and Carter, and there is just nobody is proposing any sort of systematic account. You get stories about terrorism. Look how such and such religion leads to terrorism. Look at, or psychological here, for example, in this title, you've got arrogance as a factor. But is really arrogance the main factor in the processes of polarization? I find it very strange. So if you know about some book that does this kind of general thing, tell me. Or if you think that there are serious reasons why we should never even attempt to systematize.
Thank you, Nenad. Professor Cassam.
Thanks for the talk. I agreed with a lot of what you were saying. So my question is about how you see the relationship between two approaches to polarization. So one approach is a kind of structural approach. So to think of polarization as, roughly speaking, a consequence of political dynamics. For example, the division of people into echo chambers and epistemic bubbles and so on. But then on the other side, there's polarization as the product, as the result of a conscious strategy by I guess people you call polarization entrepreneurs. So that's not representing polarization as something that sort of just happens. Rather, polarization is something that is made to happen, that comes about through the agency of political actors who use various techniques to actually increase polarization. So I just wondered how you saw the relative importance of these two explanations. And on the one side, a kind of impersonal explanation, that's the first type. And then on the second type is a much more personal explanation.
Thanks a lot for the question. I think we badly need both. And for example, J.A.Carter and Berrocal, they mention the entrepreneurs. They talk about entrepreneurs, and funnily, they see the polarization as exclusively something that happens on the collective level. They say if you look at it from a kind of virtue theoretic perspective of individuals, you'll get nothing. You just can't explain the important phenomena. This I find incredible because if you are an entrepreneur, you will be looking at, so you will be the individual who is active. You will be the individual who wants to produce results, but you have to look at the collective structures where you can start. For example, in where I was living, in my part of Croatia, an intelligent entrepreneur would have played on the card of religious disagreement. One could say, well, we the Croats, we are Catholics, and there are the Serbs who are heretics, who they really don't. On the other hand, in other situations, there will be different contrasts between Croats and Serbs that an entrepreneur would mobilize. I think it's the same thing with the Middle Eastern culture, where you can play the Sunni Shia contrast, or you can play the Islam Christian contrast, and so on and so on. So you really, an individual entrepreneur has to think about the collective structures. Both structures are, I would say, both structures are important. Both structures demand the attention of as one colleague of ours would say, of the vice squad, people dealing with vice epistemology.
Thank you.